This is December 1944. The Second World War, the deadliest conflict in human history, has raged for over 5 years. Tens of millions are dead. Cities are ash. But it is not over. As families across the globe try to grasp for a sliver of normalcy, for a moment of peace, millions of soldiers, from the frozen forests of Belgium to the steamy jungles of Burma, are spending what they do not yet know will be the last Christmas of WW2. This is not one story, but a mosaic, a global snapshot of a planet holding its breath. We will travel from a bomb-shattered Berlin, where a dictator hosts a ghostly party, to a snowy foxhole in the Ardennes, where an American paratrooper writes a final letter home, to a captured Philippine church, where a desperate Japanese officer contemplates a doomed last stand. This is the story of the last Christmas before the end, a season of twilight where hope, despair, terror, and fleeting humanity collided under the shadow of total war. This is history, documented, raw, and real. Deep within a complex of damp, reinforced concrete bunkers in the East Prussian forest, the architect of the global catastrophe of WW2 presides over a gathering that feels more like a séance than a military conference. Adolf Hitler, his left hand trembling from the early stages of Parkinson's disease, his body hunched and his face pallid, addresses his assembled generals. Men like Heinz Guderian, the architect of the early Blitzkrieg victories, now struggling as chief of the Army General Staff, and the ever-loyal Alfred Jodl of the OKW. The atmosphere is thick with cigarette smoke, delusion, and the cloying scent of pine needles from a small decorated tree placed in a corner, a pathetic attempt at seasonal cheer. It is a war council, but also a grim parody of a Christmas party. Just 8 days earlier, Hitler had launched his last, desperate offensive in the West, Operation Wachт am Rhein *, the Ardennes counteroffensive, which the Allies will call the Battle of the Bulge. He speaks not of grim tactical reality, the stalled columns, the critical fuel shortages, the stubborn American resistance at places like St. Vith and the Elsenborn Ridge, but of destiny, of a miraculous reversal, of Friedrich the Great's last-minute salvation in the 7 Years' War. He believes the split between the Western Allies and the Soviets is imminent, that this offensive will shatter the unnatural coalition against him. The champagne glasses raised here in a forced toast celebrate a fantasy. The food, while better than what the average German soldier or civilian will see, is consumed in a bunker where the air is stale and the walls sweat with condensation, a physical manifestation of the regime's decay. Outside the bunker's massive security zones, the real war continues unabated. The Soviet Red Army, having obliterated Army Group Center in the colossal Operation Bagration that summer, is now paused along the Vistula River, but only to resupply and finalize plans for its final, apocalyptic push into the German heartland, scheduled for mid-January 1945. In the West, American and British forces, though reeling from the surprise and ferocity of the attack in the Ardennes, are already mobilizing a colossal response, with Eisenhower shifting reserves and Patton beginning his famous wheel north with the Third Army. The strategic reality of WW2 at this precise moment is that Nazi Germany is caught in an inescapable vice between two industrial superpowers, and Hitler's Christmas gamble in the Ardennes is not the beginning of a comeback, but the final, violent spasm of a mortally wounded regime. The festive trappings in the wolf's lair, the tree, the forced toasts, cannot mask the pervasive smell of damp concrete, diesel exhaust from generators, and the profound, gathering odor of imminent doom. The cold is absolute, a penetrating, crystalline freeze that locks the Ardennes forest in a deathly stillness, broken only by the crack of sniper fire, the crump of mortars, and the distant, thunderous thump of heavy artillery. In the besieged town of Bastogne, completely surrounded by elite elements of the German 5th Panzer Army, men of the U.S. 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, along with combat engineers, tank destroyer crews, and stragglers from shattered units, huddle in frozen foxholes and the cellars of shattered buildings. They are short on everything: ammunition, medical supplies, food, and most critically, proper winter clothing. Many still wear their standard-issue field jackets and trench coats, utterly inadequate for temperatures that plunge well below 0 Fahrenheit at night. Their acting commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, has just issued his legendary one-word reply, "Nuts," to a formal German surrender ultimatum delivered under a white flag. For these paratroopers, Christmas is not a celebration, but a supreme test of endurance, will, and camaraderie. Chaplains hold hushed, makeshift services in cellars lit by kerosene lamps, the prayers and hymns competing with the ominous whistle of incoming shells and the rumble of Panzer IVs and Panthers maneuvering in the woods beyond the perimeter. Men share a single carefully hoarded cigarette, the brief glow reflecting in eyes ringed with exhaustion and strain. They speak in low tones of home, of Christmas trees glowing in living rooms back in Ohio or Tennessee, of families gathered around radios listening to President Roosevelt's fireside chats, of the smell of pine, roasting turkey, and gingerbread. Here, their Christmas meal is a frozen can of pork and beans or stew from a K-ration, perhaps heated over a tiny, concealed flame made from a precious sliver of hexamine tablet, if they dare risk the smoke giving away their position. The constant, gnawing cold is a silent enemy. It causes crippling trench foot and frostbite. Men watch, helpless, as their own toes or fingers swell, blister, and turn black within their sodden boots and gloves. Amputation in the makeshift aid stations is a constant, grisly reality. This is the sharp, unforgiving end of the Western Front in WW2 at Christmas. Yet within this frozen hell, acts of profound, simple humanity persist and define the experience. A medic, ignoring sniper fire, scrambles across an icy field to drag a wounded comrade to safety. Two enemies, in a fleeting, unspoken truce born of mutual exhaustion, might simultaneously emerge to retrieve wounded from a snow-covered killing zone between the lines, exchanging wary glances but not shots. It is a Christmas stripped bare of all commercial and ceremonial pretense, reduced to its absolute core elements, the primal will to survive, the unbreakable bond between comrades, and a faint, stubborn hope for a future beyond the next artillery barrage or probing infantry attack. The defense of Bastogne at this moment is more than a military action. It is a symbol of defiant resilience, a small, bright flame of determination flickering in the vast, cold darkness of the European Winter War. December 24, 1944. The Eastern Front along the Vistula River, Poland. Along the frozen, snow-covered banks of the Vistula River, the contrast between the two opposing armies is stark, profound, and terrifying. On the western side, German soldiers of the shattered Ninth Army and various other depleted formations cling to their fortified positions in a defensive line known as the Asterisk Barrier. Their Christmas is one of profound, bone-deep dread. They know with chilling certainty what is coming. Intelligence reports the ominous buildup of Soviet rail traffic heard at night, and the sheer, heavy silence from the enemy side during the day all scream of a massive, impending offensive. For the German Lancer on the Eastern Front, the Soviet soldier is no longer just an enemy. He has been transformed by years of brutal warfare and Nazi propaganda into the Untermensch Asterisk, the subhuman, now mutated into an avenging, inexorable, and pitiless force. Their Christmas Eve Asterisk Heiliger Abend is marked not by carols, but by fear, by letters written home that feel like final testaments, by the haunting, eerie sound of Soviet soldiers across the frozen river singing deep, melancholic Russian folk songs that carry clearly across the still, cold air. Their rations are meager, black bread, thin soup, maybe a scant issue of schnapps if they are lucky. Fuel for warmth is desperately scarce. There is a crushing, pervasive sense of their own propaganda's lies. The promise of Asterisk Lebensraum and final victory has been replaced by the desperate, pragmatic hope for survival, or failing that, capture by the Western Allies rather than the Red Army. Many of these defenders are no longer the confident veterans of 1941. They are teenagers hastily conscripted from the Hitlerjugend Asterisk, or old men drafted into the Asterisk Volkssturm Asterisk, given panzerfasts and a few days' training, and thrown into the line alongside the weary remnants of once-proud divisions. Across the river, in the vast Soviet marshalling areas concealed in forests and behind hills, the mood is different, a tense, focused, and grim anticipation. For the Red Army soldier, the Asterisk Krasnaya Armia, this is the Asterisk Velikaya Otechestvenaya Voyna Asterisk, the Great Patriotic War. Many have been fighting since the catastrophic days of Operation Barbarossa in 1941. They have seen their villages burned, their families killed or enslaved. There is no official Christmas celebration in the officially atheist Soviet state. December 25th is a non-date on the calendar. However, the date of January 7th, Christmas on the old Julian calendar still observed by the Russian Orthodox Church, holds a deep cultural resonance for many, a private, suppressed memory of faith and tradition. Yet on this particular evening, the thoughts are not primarily of religion or festivity, but of the coming final storm. Political officers, *politruks, give last-minute briefings, emphasizing the historic, liberating mission of the upcoming offensive. Tank crews, their breath fogging in the cold, perform last-minute maintenance on the engines and tracks of their ubiquitous T-34-85s. Infantrymen meticulously clean their reliable PPSH-41 submachine guns and check the sharpness of their entrenching tools, which would also serve as brutal close combat weapons. There is a grim, palpable determination, a collective hunger to finally bring the war to the beast's lair, to cross the Vistula, and to extract a terrible, long-awaited reckoning for the horrors inflicted upon the motherland. The Eastern Front of WW2, the most brutal and numerically massive theater of the entire global conflict, is in a state of suspended, coiled violence. It is a gigantic spring, wound to its absolute limit, waiting to release an avalanche of men and metal that will sweep westward with unprecedented speed and fury, beginning just days after the calendar in the West marks a day of peace and goodwill. December 25, 1944. The heat is oppressive, a damp, heavy jungle blanket that contrasts violently with the crystalline cold of the European winter. For General Douglas MacArthur, his dramatic promise of "I shall return," fulfilled by the landings at Leyte in October, Christmas Day is a moment crafted for triumphant symbolism and the cameras. He attends a carefully staged church service with his staff on the island, the picture of the confident, messianic liberator, ensuring the world sees him reclaiming the Philippines. But for the average American GI or Marine fighting in the treacherous, rain-sodden mountains of Leyte's interior against General Tomoyuki Yamashita's stubborn, skillful defenders, Christmas is a disorienting, muddy, and deadly affair. There are no chestnuts roasting on an open fire. Instead, men fight a fanatical, often invisible enemy in dense, triple-canopy jungle where the rain falls in torrential sheets, turning trails into quagmires. They suffer not only from enemy fire, but from a host of tropical diseases, malaria, dengue fever, dysentery, and scrub typhus, which can kill as surely as a Japanese bullet. Their Christmas dinner might be a can of lukewarm turkey loaf or processed ham from a stateside comfort package, eaten under rain poncho in a waterlogged foxhole, listening for the rustle of vegetation that could signal a night infiltration. They are thousands of miles from home, fighting a war that has taken on a particularly savage character, a war of annihilation against a foe who believes surrender is the ultimate dishonor and who often fights to the last man. Their thoughts are with their buddies in the next hole, with the next ridgeline to be taken under blistering machine gun fire, and with a deep, weary longing for this to simply be over, for the unimaginable concept of peace to become a reality. For the Japanese soldier, cut off from resupply, outnumbered, and with no hope of evacuation or reinforcement, the situation is one of existential despair. The Western concept of Christmas is alien, but the end of the year *Omasoka is a traditional time for reflection, cleaning, and settling affairs. For many isolated soldiers, reflection brings only the cold certainty of death in service to the emperor. Some commanders, in a twisted perversion of Bushido code, might encourage final suicidal *banzai charges as a form of perverse celebration, a greeting to the emperor through glorious, sacrificial death. Elsewhere in the vast expanse of the Pacific, on countless nameless coral atolls, and aboard the massive U.S. Navy task forces that now rule the seas, WW2 grinds on with relentless, mechanized fury, utterly indifferent to the calendar. Aboard the USS Enterprise, or a British Pacific Fleet carrier like HMS Indomitable, men work around the clock in stifling heat or on windswept flight decks. Christmas Day is just another watch rotation, another pre-dawn launch of Hellcats and Avengers to strike Japanese airfields on Luzon, another tense period of combat air patrol. The war in the Pacific, a logistical marvel of amphibious power and island hopping, pauses for no holiday. The city is blacked out, its skyline scarred by the gaps of buildings lost during the Blitz of 1940-41, and now haunted by the new, terrifying threat of the V-2 rocket. These vengeance weapons arrive without warning, supersonic and devastating. Their random impacts are psychological torture for a population that had grown accustomed to the sirens of the earlier bomber raids. Yet life, stubbornly, persists. In homes across the capital, families gather around hearths, if they are lucky enough to have a precious ration of coal. The King's Christmas speech, broadcast on the BBC at 3 p.m., is a somber but resolute affair. King George VI, his voice steady despite his stammer, speaks of endurance, sacrifice, and the light of hope ahead, a masterful performance of reassuring leadership. For many Londoners, this Christmas feels qualitatively different from the bleak, defiant ones of 1940 or 1941. There is a tangible sense that the tide has turned irrevocably, that final victory over Nazi Germany, though perhaps still many hard months away, is now inevitable. The landings in Normandy, the liberation of Paris, and the steady advance into the Netherlands provided proof. But this fragile hope is profoundly tempered by acute weariness and fresh daily grief. Almost every family has lost a son, a husband, a brother, a father. The rationing is paradoxically stricter than ever. The Ministry of Food has ensured that the Christmas meal is a triumph of culinary ingenuity over scarcity. A small piece of spam or Woolton pie disguised as poultry, homegrown vegetables from the Victory Garden. A single, precious, hoarded egg for baking. Children receive simple, often handmade gifts. A carved wooden toy, a knitted sweater. The pubs are full, the air thick with smoke and the sound of communal singing, songs like We'll Meet Again, and the white cliffs of Dover, now carrying a bittersweet, almost elegiac weight. Soldiers on leave from the fronts, in a mixture of British, Canadian, American, and Polish uniforms, mix with civilians, the uniforms a stark reminder of the ongoing global struggle. For the British people, who had stood alone against the Nazi onslaught in 1940, this last Christmas of WW2 is marked by a quiet, grim pride and an overwhelming longing for the return of normal, quiet life. They can see the end of the tunnel, but they know, with hard-won wisdom, that the path to it will be paved with more sacrifice, more telegrams from the War Office, and more nights listening for the unseen, unstoppable V2. A continent and 2 oceans away from the direct fighting, Christmas in America presents a paradox of abundance and deep-seated anxiety. The United States is the undisputed arsenal of democracy, its industrial machine humming 24 hours a day in factories from Detroit to Los Angeles, producing the planes, tanks, trucks, and ships that fuel the Allied war effort on 2 fronts. Department stores are filled with consumer goods, a stark, almost jarring contrast to the rationing-ravaged shelves of Europe. But this surface-level plenty is haunted. In every small town and every city neighborhood, there is an empty chair at the Christmas table. Gold star banners hang in front windows, signifying a family member killed in action. Families cluster anxiously around Philco or RCA radios, tuning in to news broadcasts from somewhere in Belgium or somewhere in the Pacific, hanging on every word from correspondents like Edward R. Murrow or Ernie Pyle for some hint of their loved one's fate or the war's progress. The war is omnipresent in the culture. In the lyrics of Bing Crosby's phenomenally popular I'll Be Home for Christmas, a song of heartbreaking yearning that sold millions of records. In Hollywood films like Since You Went Away or The White Cliffs of Dover that blend patriotism with sentimental family drama. In the pages of Asterisk Life or the Saturday Evening Post Asterisk, which might show photographs of GIs celebrating a makeshift Christmas in a bombed-out French church positioned right next to vibrant advertisements for war bonds, urging citizens to back the attack. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, visibly frail, his face drawn, and just weeks from his death at Warm Springs, delivers a Christmas Eve address to the nation from his home in Hyde Park, New York. His voice, still strong and reassuring, speaks of the righteous might of the Allied cause and expresses hope for a coming peace born of the brotherhood of man. For the American public, this Christmas is spent in a state of suspension between a booming, full-employment wartime economy and the palpable daily fear for the lives of their sons, husbands, and brothers fighting in distant, unimaginable places. The certainty of eventual victory, established after Midway and Stalingrad, is now a widely held belief, but it is no longer a bright, inspiring beacon. It has morphed into a grim, inevitable conclusion that must be reached, no matter the terrifying cost yet to be paid in the battles for Manila, Okinawa, and the invasion of Japan itself. While soldiers at the front and civilians on the home fronts marked the day as best they could, for millions caught in the gears of the WW2 machine, Christmas 1944 was a depth of suffering and horror invisible to the celebratory world. In German POW camps like Stalag Luft III in Sagan, Allied airmen used their meager Red Cross parcels, containing items like chocolate, powdered milk, and cigarettes, to create tiny, shared feasts, a vital morale booster. Simultaneously, in a breathtaking act of defiance, many were quietly continuing clandestine tunneling operations, the legacy of the Great Escape of March 1944, which had led to the murder of 50 recaptured officers. Their Christmas was one of muted solidarity and secret resistance. In the Nazi concentration and extermination camps, Auschwitz-Birkenau, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, the concept of Christmas was a brutal, obscene mockery. For the emaciated inmates, Jews, Roma, Soviet POWs, political prisoners, it was just another day in the calculus of survival, another day of starvation rations, of brutal forced labor in frozen fields or synthetic rubber factories, of standing for endless roll calls in thin uniforms, and of the ever-present, grotesque threat of the gas chamber and crematorium. Any whisper of a Christmas carol or a remembered prayer was a profoundly private, internal act of defiance, a fragile clutch at a memory of a humanity that the SS system was dedicated to erasing. In besieged Budapest, Hungarian Jews and civilians were trapped in a nightmarish pocket between the retreating, vengeful German and Arrow Cross forces and the slowly advancing Soviet armies, facing starvation, summary executions, and street-to-street fighting. In the vast interior of China, refugees who had fled the Japanese occupation eked out a desperate existence. War having stretched on for them since the Marco Polo Bridge incident in 1937, a conflict within the wider global war often overlooked in the West. This global conflagration, WW2, had created a vast shadow geography of suffering, displaced persons camps, prisoner of war camps, extermination camps, besieged cities, where the calendar of feast days held no meaning, only the stark, daily arithmetic of caloric intake and the chance of seeing another sunrise. Stepping back from the intimate, human scenes, the global military and political situation on December 25, 1944, was one of deceptive, knife-edge tension, a brief pause before the final, cataclysmic acts of WW2. In the West, the Battle of the Bulge was at its operational climax. The German spearhead, the tip of Kampfgruppe paper, had been destroyed near La Gleize. Vital crossroads of St. Vith had finally fallen after a heroic delay, but the northern shoulder at Elsenborn Ridge held rock solid. The siege of Bastogne, though still ongoing, was on the verge of being broken by Patton's Third Army from the south. The German offensive had decisively failed in its strategic goals of reaching Antwerp and splitting the Allies, but it had shocked the Allied command, inflicted heavy casualties, and delayed the Western Allies' own offensive plans into Germany by several weeks. In the east, the Soviet military machine, the most formidable ground force ever assembled, was in its final, meticulous preparations for the Vistula-Oder offensive, scheduled to begin on January 12, 1945. This campaign would involve over 2 million Red Army soldiers, 6,000 tanks, and tens of thousands of artillery pieces. Its goal was nothing less than the rapid conquest of everything between the Vistula and the Oder rivers, a breathtaking advance that would bring the Soviet Union to the gates of Berlin itself by early February. In the Pacific, the U.S. had secured Leyte, though mopping-up operations would continue for months. The next steps were already in motion. The invasion of the main Philippine island of Luzon was scheduled for early January 1945, to be followed by the horrific battles for Iwo Jima, February, and Okinawa, April, campaigns that would be among the bloodiest of the entire war for the U.S. Marine Corps and Navy. Concurrently, the U.S. strategic bombing campaign against the Japanese home islands, under the command of General Curtis LeMay, was preparing a brutal shift in tactics from high-altitude precision bombing to low-altitude incendiary raids designed to burn out Japan's predominantly wooden cities. The first of these devastating firebombing raids on Tokyo would occur on the night of March 9-10, 1945. In the utmost secrecy, the Manhattan Project, the Allied effort to build an atomic bomb, was reaching its final, frantic stages at Los Alamos, Hanford, and Oak Ridge. Scientists like J. Robert Oppenheimer, Enrico Fermi, and Niels Bohr, many of them refugees from European fascism, worked through the holiday, acutely aware that they were forging a weapon of almost unimaginable power that could potentially end the war with Japan, but would irrevocably alter the very nature of human conflict and geopolitics forever. The world's leaders, Churchill, Roosevelt, Stalin, Hitler, Tojo, were all making their calculations for the year 1945, a year they each knew, with varying degrees of clarity or delusion, would bring conclusive and likely cataclysmic resolution to the global struggle that had begun in 1939. The Christmas of 1944 stands as a poignant, powerful watershed in modern history. It was the last Christmas where the entire world was fully, totally engulfed in the fires of the Second World War. For those who lived through it, whether in a flooded foxhole in Leyte or by a rationed fireside in London, it was a moment of profound suspension, a collective holding of breath. The old world order, the pre-1939 system of empires and certainties, was dead and buried in the rubble of Stalingrad, Warsaw, and Coventry. But the new world, the post-war order of superpowers, nuclear weapons, the United Nations, and the Cold War, had not yet been born. The hope so fervently expressed in letters, in prayers, and in songs that season, for peace, for reunion, for a simple end to the killing, would soon collide with the complex, harsh realities of victory, the discovery of the Holocaust's full horror, the daunting task of physically and morally rebuilding a continent, the onset of Soviet domination in Eastern Europe, and the dawn of the atomic age with its attendant nightmares. The sacrifices made, the tiny, luminous acts of kindness performed in the midst of horror, the letters written by soldiers that would become cherished final words, all of this forms the deep, human legacy of the war. When we look back from the vantage point of the 21st century, the Christmas of 1944 serves as a stark and necessary reminder that history is not just the movement of armies and the schemes of empires, but is fundamentally the story of countless individuals, each with their own fears, loves, and hopes, caught in the storms of vast, impersonal forces. They sought light in the deepest darkness. They marked a day dedicated to peace and goodwill in a world consumed by industrialized hatred, and they stood, unknowingly, on the precipice of a new and fraught historical epoch. It was the last Christmas of World War II, a final, strained farewell to an age of unparalleled darkness, and a fragile, whispered hope for the uncertain dawn to come.